Good evening, everybody. I'm Evelyn Gansglass. I'm co-chair with Ann Baker of the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, and I welcome you to this session, which we're calling um, Know Your Rights. I'm sorry, just blanked. I guess there have been a lot of Know Your Rights calls by the ACLU and others, so that may be contributing to the turnout tonight. We'll be recording this session and posting it on our website so that you can share the contents with others as well, and so that you yourselves can refer back to it as needed. We have two speakers, both extremely knowledgeable and experienced, and we really thank them for taking the time out of their busy schedules to talk with you. The first person who's going to talk is Oscar Sarabia Roman, who's a staff attorney with the ACLU Immigrants Rights Project. He was previously a law clerk with Judge Virginia Phillips in the U.S. District Court of Central District of California. He's a graduate of UC Berkeley Law School, Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and Stanford University. Robert Remes is a Washington-based immigration and nationality lawyer with 47 years of experience. He was just in court today, still working the issues. He's a graduate of Cornell University and Boston University Law School. Oscar will start off by providing the lay of the land, such as it is in a very rapidly changing policy environment. So as he speaks, there may be more changes, but he's closely tracking that. And then Bob will follow with advice about what you can do to help new immigrants. And when I say new immigrants, I mean refugees, asylees, parolees, DACA recipients, all of the people, immigrants with different statuses, which clearly impact the danger they're under at the moment. And they both will talk about resources that you can draw on to keep abreast with changes. So since we were going to have Q&A at the end, but let me ask Oscar and Bob, should we stop after your presentation first and do some Q&A and then move on to Bob? Or how do you want to manage that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we could do a Q&A after each section. And I mean, Bob is going to be interrupting me as well to add more color and information to what I present and vice versa.
Okay.
And yeah, given the number of people here, I think it will be great to be the most useful and answer questions that you may have.
Just to say this is a quality audience. That's all we can say. They can have tremendous impact. So we thank you again for taking time to do this. So I turn it over to Oscar.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Evelyn. And thank you all for being here, listening to the changing times, during these changing times that we're all experiencing. I'm going to talk about like 4 broad buckets that I think could distill most of the emergency orders, the executive orders, and the guidances. So first I'll talk about sort of the unknown stuff that's outside the US or blocked by the courts that may not be either relevant or we may not be able to participate in directly in the interior right now. Second, I'll move on to what is expanded expedited removal, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what that is. Then I'll talk about the termination and revocation of parole or temporary protection status. And again, I'll discuss what that is. And finally, I'll end with the revocation of the sensitive locations memo. And through all of these discussions of the executive orders at the broad policy level, Bob and I will also discuss how we can engage in each of those and how we can help out immigrant communities in the interior. So first, there's a lot of unknown that we still that is still out there. There's a lot of things that we don't know how they're going to go into effect, or executive orders that have been signed, but we don't know exactly how they're going to be implemented. For example, the military being deployed at the border right now, so far is for logistical support, but it may increase enforcement. They may be activated under what's called the Alien Enemies Act or the Insurrection Act to engage in direct law enforcement activities, even though they're prohibited under normal circumstances, unless an emergency is called. Second, I know this is dear to many of you who have participated before, is the refugee ban, where that Trump has shut down completely the refugee program and has effectively implemented an asylum ban as well by shutting down CBP-1, shutting down access at the border, and reinstating what is called the Remain in Mexico policy. So right now, there really is no way to apply for refugee or asylum here in the U.S.
Wait, there's no way of applying for asylum at the border, but within the country, and many of you may have contact with people, the asylum program at local asylum offices, which has a 7-year backlog, that, so far as I know, continues, I can't say vibrant, but it continues functioning. So if you have people who have applied for asylum administratively, that continues.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Bob. This is all at the border. Anybody who has like a pending application, what is called affirmative asylum, as Bob said, that's still is still valid and still ongoing. The last of that first bucket is birthright citizenship, which we sued, and several courts now have blocked, so that for the time being, that will not go into effect. So I don't think anybody has to worry about that right now. So now I'm gonna move on into what directly is going to affect a lot of migrants here in the interior, in your communities, in your jurisdictions. The first of that is expanded expedited removal. Expanded expedited removal is a process where low-level immigration officers can summarily remove certain non-citizens without a hearing before an immigration judge. Now, these non-citizens are still entitled, even after being placed in expedited removal, or ER for short. They're still entitled to asylum if they express a fear of returning to their home country. Though sometimes that is not always honored, but that is an important protection that they still have. Now, before the change, it generally applied to those arriving within 2 weeks and within 100 miles of the border. Trump changed that for expedited removal to now apply to all citizens who have been in the United States for less than 2 years, anywhere in the country. And I think this is an important reminder, and I think Bob will get into this and can discuss this a little bit more, of whoever you're interacting with in terms of the immigrant population, to remind them, if they have been here for longer than 2 years, to require to carry with them some of that proof of residency, that they've been here longer than 2 years, so they will not be placed in expedited removal. In terms of the second bucket of changes that will directly affect a lot of people, is the termination and revocation of parole. There's a program granting temporary status to people usually fleeing war and extreme humanitarian conditions, like those citizens from Ukraine, Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua. I may be forgetting some under that categorical approach. Now Trump has effectively terminated all of those categorical programs. And for those whose parole will end, has ended, will end, or will be terminated by Trump, then they may be placed in expedited removal that they have been here less than 2 years. So now we see how two separate programs now interact, where those people who had parole and will no longer have parole will be channeled into this new system of expedited removal, where they can be removed without having a hearing in front of an immigration judge.
Oscar, are there viable overall litigation challenges to the parole termination, or is that so completely within the president's authority that it cannot be effectively challenged?
There have been some filings in courts. It's a little tough because it is at the discretion of the executive. What has not ended is the case-by-case basis. So an individual may still be granted parole if they can show sort of this heightened threshold standard that they warrant parole, although it's not likely under this new administration and their new guidelines and their new thresholds for them to be granted that. It may happen in extreme cases. Unfortunately, yeah, this is very discretionary because it's all at the discretion of the Attorney General to grant those parole programs. So any challenges to it will be difficult for this to be renewed.
How does a potential challenge to the revocation of the parole that you just mentioned, how does that compare to the attempts to revoke DACA, which was perhaps even less founded in law? And the Supreme Court, if I'm right, said that you can revoke it, but you got to do it in a rational, thoughtful manner. Is that okay?
Yes. The word reliance interest that were argued in the DACA case that said that they were entitled to a legal benefit created through this program. It is interesting how those two will interact because the same arguments theoretically do apply to the parole program, and would make sense under normal, I think, circumstances that this would also be a violation of the law if this was revoked, just like Trump did now. But unfortunately, we do not live under normal circumstances where the same arguments will apply. But I definitely we all take your point and we all agree as well, that there are reliance interests here. There's a legal benefit that was placed there. But unfortunately, we're not too hopeful. But again, anything can happen. So there may be an opportunity, a chance for a court to take those arguments and reinstate this, but not likely.
Let me ask one more follow-up question, because I'm curious. This may be too technical for the audience or too detailed, but when DACA was attempted to be canceled, when DACA was challenged, the challengers, Republicans, Texas, whatever, was able to find a nice sympathetic court. Can people who want to protect parole, can they find their own somewhat more sympathetic venues?
Yes, I think there's always litigation strategies where we look at different courts around the country that may be more favorable. And that's a strategy that's part of every litigator's thought process. But unfortunately, I think all of this ends up in the Supreme Court where we know the makeup, we know how they lean, we know how sort of they reason. So although it may be paused for a little while, it's unlikely to be overturned, for the executive order to be overturned at the Supreme Court. If I'll move on to, unless Bob wants to add anything else in there, or anybody else, to the last sort of set of things that really affect a lot of people in the interior, and that is the revocation of the sensitive locations memo. Before, there was internal ICE policy not to conduct immigration enforcement in places like schools, hospitals, churches, courthouses, etc., absent exigent circumstances, so absent like a real emergency. And now ICE can conduct immigration enforcement anywhere. But an important thing to remember is that the constitutional limits that protect us and protect individuals still apply. So for example, in any of those places, those jurisdictions, those places can still require a judicial warrant to enter into non-public areas. And here it's important to know the difference between a judicial warrant and an ICE administrative warrant. The ICE administrative warrant has no legal effect at all. You can ignore those. Sometimes they present them, but you can definitely not do whatever the ICE official says if they have a ICE administrative warrant. If they have a judicial warrant, on the other hand, that is signed by a judge, then normally you must comply. And we recommend talking to either the school council, the hospital council, or whoever is the legal counsel for that place. We also encourage, and this is how I think many of you can get involved now, where you can encourage schools and districts in a lot of those places to adopt policies that explicitly say that they will not cooperate with ICE. So for example, they will not give consent. ICE goes to many of these places and just asks for consent to go in. And if people do not know their rights, they usually do say yes, but you're not required to consent to them entering. And we could also encourage a lot of these places not to collect immigration data, immigration history. Unfortunately, today, there were some news that Oklahoma, the State Board of Education in Oklahoma, passed the rule requiring their schools to collect immigration information of their students, which is this is in direct violation of the Equal Protection Clause as interpreted by Plyler v. Doe, which is a decision that guarantees education to non-citizen children all over the country. So there's a lot of ways where you can get involved to adopt these policies, to get involved in rapid response organizations and get involved in know your rights trainings, which Bob will now talk about.
So maybe 1 second just before Bob takes over, does anybody have a burning question that you want to ask Oscar, or can we move on?
Yes, could I raise a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
I mean, that last tidbit that you just added there at the end about what individual groups and citizens can do, are there trainings available for, I'm previously a legal aid attorney, and part of my experience was as a Hispanic outreach attorney. I would go into schools and churches and Latin American community centers and do these types of know your rights seminars. is it possible for there to be training for either attorneys and many non-attorneys to do these types of know your rights training seminars?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of groups that have ongoing trainings. I haven't even attended some, just to see what they're talking about, what they're focusing on specifically. And there are both trainings for attorneys and non-attorneys. Non-attorneys, a lot of it's advocacy, help with legal intakes by interviewing people, even providing know your rights about things that you can train them to give trainings about. And I could share those resources with Evelyn and those groups.
That would be great. Thank you.
There's also a lot of toolkits out there where I can also share with Evelyn to share with everybody. That's sort of, you can read through and see exactly how you can plug in as a volunteer, whether you have a legal background or not. So yeah, I would encourage you also to get in touch with your local rapid response organization. You may have one at the city level or county level or state level, who is coordinating sort of these responses, and you could ask them as well how to engage.
Thank you.
Right, so Bob, why don't you?
Okay, so one thing I want to say, playing off what Oscar just said, and that question is that there are any number, there's a tremendous number of information on Know Your Rights presentations. There are ACLU links. I don't know if Evelyn, you put in the one that I presented, that two of us presented to my organization, but there are lots of information out there. But what I want to emphasize is that when working with individuals, or indeed when working with groups, it's not enough, nowhere near enough to say, here's a piece of paper that explains, even in Spanish, know your rights. Because when someone's pounding on their door at 5 o'clock in the morning says, let us in, nobody is going to be brave enough to deal with that unless they have practiced beforehand. I'm very much trying to encourage people to role play, to practice. You can do it yourselves with whoever you're dealing with. You can encourage others, children who perhaps maybe have a better grasp of English or whatever than their parents, but people have to practice. One person plays the ICE agent, one person plays the poor immigrant, and they take turns saying, let us in, and the person saying, no, I won't let you in, show me your warrant. And then you have to be able to learn, not at 5 o'clock in the morning, then it's too late. You got to look at beforehand the difference between a judicial warrant, which says U.S. District Court at the top, and an ICE warrant, which says immigration or something like that. At least in my presentation, and it came from I think, I'm not sure what the link is, but I'll find it for Evelyn to find. There's actually 2 examples of these warrants and subpoenas, one judicial, one administrative, and it's circled in orange what you should be looking for. But again, 5 o'clock in the morning, that's the wrong time to do it. You got to practice this stuff beforehand. Your organizations have to help people to be prepared, and it's too late when it happens. The other thing that Oscar alluded to and mentioned is that there's room for you all to lobby, encourage your local county, school districts, whatever, not to be fooled, not to give in to ICE agents showing up at one of these sensitive locations without having a judicial warrant or a judicial subpoena. Just send them away. That's, of course, they expect, ICE does, that people won't exert their rights. it's hard to do. It's hard to do for a privileged white person with gray hair to do it, of course, but you have to practice in order to build up the courage to insist on one's rights. And that's one of the messages that I think is so important, is to engage whoever you're engaging with, whether it's an individual, whether it's a group, to practice and rehearse and role play. And that goes to the sensitive location business. I don't know how much luck you'll have keeping ICE out of hospitals or schools, but because keeping them out depends on the institution. So the institution has to be educated and persuaded to insist upon rights, and that's for you all to lobby those people if you're able to do that. There was a discussion, a very important discussion that Oscar had on the termination of parole. He mentioned a number of countries. I suspect that Venezuela is probably the most numerous. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe Ukrainian also. I don't actually know. But these people who followed the procedures and who are here based on parole, so they're here legally under government provisions, but that parole can be revoked, has been revoked. But people need to know that if they are in that group, they have the right, either administratively right away, or when they appear before an immigration judge, to apply for asylum. And this is true for many people, I think, to protect themselves, are in the end going to have to apply for asylum in the United States. Now, just because you apply for asylum doesn't mean you get approved, but applying for asylum buys lots and lots of time. The administrative asylum process in the United States is very much broken. Even if you apply for asylum before immigration judges, that tends to take a long time. And you don't have to have a great case. You just have to you have to not lie. You've got to be honest. Better to say, I don't want to go back to Canada because it's too cold. That obviously won't win, but it's true. Better than making up some fake story. So it's better to have a weak case than an untrue case. Never let your people that you're counseling or working with submit stuff that is untrue. But a possible resolution for lots of people, not a resolution, a possible strategy for many people will be to apply for asylum. And even if it's not great, better to do it than to do nothing. I can talk more about the asylum process, but I don't know that that's relevant. But it is a strategy that many people are going to have to follow. And people who have been paroled, like Ukrainians and Venezuelans and Haitians, whatever people, officially you have to apply for asylum before you've been in the United States for a year. And many of these people have been here for a year, perhaps. But if you've been here in some legal status like parole, then you have to apply within 6 months of when that parole ends. So even if you've been here for a year and a half, you can still apply for asylum because of the way the system works. So that's important, I think, for you all to know that that's a way in which you can help people, guide people, encourage people not to give up and disappear and run away, but to fight for those rights. There was something else I wanted to say. I'm sorry. When you get old, you forget these things. What did I want to say? Oh, the expedited removal. These people who the Trump administration is going to vastly increase the use of this process that is called expedited removal. Removal is the current word for deportation. It means the same thing. And normally, if you are caught without authorization in the United States, you're entitled to be sent to an immigration judge and apply for asylum or do whatever you want. The immigration court system has literally millions of cases pending. So depending on various factors, as bad as it is to be sent to an immigration judge, you can gain a lot of time if time turns out to be useful. Under expedited removal, you don't get to go to the judge, but you still have the right to claim asylum. It's much more difficult to do, but it can be done. And what Oscar said before about expedited removal, no matter how much Trump expands this pernicious expedited removal, it only applies to people who have been here for less than 2 years, physically in the United States for less than 2 years. So anyone that you know, anyone you're counseling, dealing with, your groups are helping, who has been here for more than 2 years, they've got to make a collection of papers that shows that they've been here for 2 years, birth certificates of their children, school records, medical records, collection of driver's licenses, whatever you can do. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. A copy you've got to carry with you in your pocket, a copy at home, a copy to a trusted friend. And then at least if you have the misfortune of being caught up, you can stay out of expedited removal, and that's a good thing. Another practical thing, at least I'd like it to be practical, is that keep in mind the people who are most at risk under the Trump administration. There are lots of people that have any type of criminal accusations or involvement, anywhere from being convicted of perhaps a serious crime and no one's ever caught up with them, or a petty crime. All those people appear in databases that are very, very easy and simple for ICE to access. So those people have to know, and you have to make sure that they know without terrorizing them, that they are at risk. Another group of people who are very much at risk are people, and there are lots of them, who came across the southern border, were told to report to an immigration court for a hearing, and for good reasons or bad reasons, good advice, bad advice, they didn't show up at their hearing. They were too afraid. When that happens, they were ordered removed in absentia. Maybe they know about it, maybe they don't, but they know if they didn't show up at a hearing. And those are easier data set of people for the Trump administration to go after, and they will. So those people are also very much at risk, and they have to reasonably know that. People who are not in those two groups are still in danger, but much less danger. And it will be easiest, and I suspect rather certain, that the ICE and DHS is going to go after those two groups, people with criminal records, people with with final orders of removal, final deportation officers. They're going to be focused on first. And ICE, there was an article recently a few days ago in the New York Times that ICE has access to the driving, what is it now? The driving record of, I can't remember, it was either 1/4 or 3/4 of the people. The point is that ICE has access to that information. ICE has access to 1/4 of the driving records, that is driver's license records, so they can find those people if the Department of Motor Vehicles has an updated address. That's perhaps an if. And the ICE also apparently has access to 3/4 of utility bill addresses and names. So people may want to think, I can't encourage them to lie on their driver's licenses, but I don't know if there's a duty of honesty to the electric company. as to names and addresses, of course, come. But anyway, people need to know that that's one way they can be found if ICE is looking for them. What else did I want to say? Anyone who's in one of these vulnerable groups, final order of removal, criminal record of any sort, if you can help them find now, not at the last moment, but now, if they can find competent legal representation, talk to a lawyer who as best anyone knows, is competent and honest, understand their rights in a way that they can't possibly do it in a conversation like this, but that people can do it if they're having a one-on-one conversation with a lawyer. It's worth the consultation fee, in my opinion. Maybe that's because I'm a lawyer, to engage someone like that. Plus, if you have met with someone like that, if in the future something terrible happens, you get stopped, you get whatever it is, then you have some level of connection to a lawyer who is more likely to therefore help you than if you're a stranger calling without that initial contact. Now, this is easier said than done. It's very easy for me to tell you to do this. And it's not going to be easy to find lawyers who know about immigration. Not so easy to find lawyers who know about immigration who are honest and competent. Unfortunately, I know, but that's where a more sophisticated person perhaps can help people they're helping do that investigation and find it. Won't be easy, but I really think that's important to engage someone now, not at the last minute. Everything you do at the last moment is a problem. So there are some of my hopefully slightly useful ideas.
Thank you, Bob. I found them really helpful. I'm sure others did as well. I noticed one of the questions is from Jim Fisher from Maine. He's a town manager and interested in the role of local governments in rural areas. What can he do in his position?
I think local governments have a great role to play in this because despite Trump's threats of defunding quote unquote sanctuary cities, it has been blocked in the courts before during his first administration, where he has tried to punish those cities or states that have those types of laws, because you cannot force state and local government to enforce immigration law, basically for them to become immigration officers. So you can push your state and local governments and your local jurisdictions not to cooperate with ICE. Obviously, not to help them. Obviously, you cannot impede anything that they do that would be against the law, but you don't have to aid them and help them in enforcing federal immigration law. So there's a lot that we can do at a local level in our own jurisdictions as well to help push better policies, better guidances, even in willing police and sheriff's departments have policies where they will not enter into what are called, for example, 287G agreements that cooperate with the federal government, whereas a pipeline from somebody who gets arrested or convicted for a small crime, but then they give that information over to the Department of Homeland Security. And you can have that, you can push for them not to enter into those type of agreements and have those policies.
And that reminds me what you just said. What's the name of this new law named after the person who was murdered? Something with
Lincoln Riley Act.
The Lincoln Riley Act, which has it passed the House? It passed the House. Did it pass the Senate? Yes.
Yes, it's waiting signature by Trump.
Well, surely that won't take long. This law makes it mandatory, among other things, it makes it mandatory for ICE to pick up people and hold people and never prohibited from letting them go if they have been charged with any one of a number of offenses. Some are serious, but shoplifting is one of them. So if you are some foolish teenager who decides you have to shoplift whatever, and you get caught and you're here without permission, ICE can pick you up, is supposed to pick you up, and may not, prohibited from letting you go, even if the charges against you are ultimately dropped. So this is a terrible threat. The law has other bad things too, but that's a terrible threat. And I don't know, maybe this is too fatuous to tell people, but if you're here as either undocumented or in an uncertain status, don't break the law. No empty beer cans in the back of your car, no taillights burned out, no shoplifting, nothing. No smoking marijuana. Save that for when you become a citizen. You can't do that stuff. And probably telling people that is wasted energy, but at least you feel you've done something. It's just deadly.
Um, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, I was just going to answer the question that was on the chat.
Go ahead.
I will put a link as to the differences of the judicial warrants, which requires a judge to sign, and an ICE administrative warrants, which is like toilet paper, like you can throw that away. For a judicial warrant, yes, you do have to comply. You have to answer the door. So this is part of the Know Your Rights training and the practice that Bob has emphasized, because I think the first step is not to open the door at all. And for them, if they do have a judicial warrant, for them to slide under the door, for you to check, make sure it is signed by a federal judge, not an immigration judge. And that's also part of the training. So, and it's important, like Bob said, it's completely true. You need to practice this, because we all get flustered in the face of any authority that may come to your door, especially police or ICE. And especially when we might not even know the difference, because they may be in plain clothes. And that goes for anybody. So it's important to practice, never open the door, ask, refuse to answer questions. And this is part of the Know Your Rights training that is widely available.
And keep in mind that when they do come to your door, I'm making up the percentage, but I bet that 98% of the time they do not have a judicial warrant. That would be very unusual. Occasionally they do. They either have no warrant and they're bluffing, or they have some administrative warrant, which counts, as Oscar said, as toilet paper. But again, you got to look at the difference. And if you are able to there's something in the ACLU material where it was nicely circled in orange, the U.S. District Court, and it made it really clear. They're always in English, of course, but if people look at it ahead of time, it's not that difficult to tell if you've practiced before 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, if you look at that link that I just posted at the bottom, they have, at the very end, they have exactly what Bob has said. They circle the areas that you should look at, what the distinctions between both. That is very important to keep in mind. And I think one other thing that's just like also practical, that is probably the minimum that we can do, is we all carry phones as well. Record every interaction, because that may be crucial evidence, not only for Bob's case, maybe a motion to suppress, a motion to terminate based on the ruse that they've been acting as police or lying about things to get in, but also in a systemic challenge to stop those types of practices. So I would encourage everybody to at least have that. Take out your phone whenever you see anything. Encourage people to record pretty much everything.
Which is always legal to record. Is that a
Mhm.
correct statement?
I think in this circumstances, generally we can't say that. You cannot record, and it varies by state. In a private setting, you sometimes need two-party consent, but will almost always be somewhere in public, and even if they try to come into a house, you can record from within your own home, an official in the course of their duties.
Kathy, who had to leave, mentioned leaving red cards, ACLU red cards. Can you just talk a little bit about what they are, how people can get them?
Yes, I could put a link. They're just small red cards that, and I don't think they're from the ACLU. I think they're from somewhere else, but I'll put a link to it. They're widely known red cards to a lot of immigrants as well that have an explanation of the rights and sort of outline what they need to do. So you can order those red cards, distribute them, give them out, because a lot of migrants already know what to look for. Oh, and the example of the judicial warrant versus the ICE admin warrant is, sorry, I sent it right here. I didn't hit send, sorry about that. And I think if nobody else has questions, I think that yes, we do face some harsh immigration policies, enforcement, and a lot of people will suffer, but I think there's hope for all of us if we are engaged, and history has proven that there is resilience, and advocacy can bring that change from all types of people. Because as we know, as we see that no law is permanent. So through solidarity and perseverance, I think we could create a more just future if we all engage.
So are there any other questions that anybody has? Well, then I thank you so much for this really useful information that you've provided, and we will publicize it widely. Again, we thought many more people would tune into this, but those who did, I'm glad you got this information. And I urge you to talk to your people in the Peace Corps community. You're all members of local Peace Corps groups, country of service groups, but also just with other community groups in which you're working, and put together a group of people who become informed and who can actually help. I was asking the places you are more as states as compared to where you served in the Peace Corps, because each state, each community is in a different place. But you can find that out locally as well. So with that, thank you so much. Any other words of wisdom?
I just want to say that as every day I read the newspaper, and I get a feeling, as many people do, of between horror and hopelessness. But some of the things that we have talked about today, they're not going to change Donald Trump, and they're not going to change administrative policy, but they can affect individual people and help them and save them and alert them and to take actions. And so there's something to be done, even if it's rather micro, there's something to be done.
That's important. Okay, so thank you so much again. And you were going to say something or not?
Yes, I was just going to remind people, well, first of all, thank you all for participating, and thank you to both of our speakers. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm going to go and practice those things so that I don't think anyone's going to pound on my door, but I want to be able to help others who might be facing that. But we have our next webinar is on state and local advocacy. And the one after that is on meeting the educational needs of immigrants and refugees and the new immigrant community. But we also have informal chat sessions, and I'm just thinking aloud here, maybe on one of these upcoming informal sessions, we might actually do a practice of, what happens if somebody's pounding on your door, something like that, to sort of demonstrate that and give our participants an opportunity to practice it.
That's a great idea.
So please do look at our website and encourage others to sign up as well. Everything we do is free. And we really thank you all for the efforts that you are doing locally and for participating with us tonight. And special thanks to our two speakers. It was very, very helpful.
Good.
Thank you again.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
night.
Bye.